And now for Module 16. I realized I could only have 16 modules, and we had to cut a lot of stuff. I mean, probably have about somewhere around, I don't know, 14, 15 hours of lecture, and the students would have, 40 hours at least of lecture, take out a little bit for tests and stuff like that out of the 45 hours of class, and maybe 35 to 36 hours. So we had to cut some stuff, and I had to make a decision. And I really want to teach location modeling. But location modeling is the kind of thing that's really hard to do well. I do have an old location modeling thing that I was given by one of my professors. And when I was a PhD, that's how old it is. And it probably still works, but it's, I'm sure it's not in use anymore. And I know there are 3 L's of location, of retailing. There are 3 L's of retailing. And the first one is location, and the second one is location, and the third one is location. And that was particularly true in the old days, but I don't think any of my students in the marketing program, we don't have a strong logistics track, and I don't really think location modeling will be something that they think about or that they really will use. Some of those students that have an entrepreneurial spirit, you may have to make a decision, and there are good decisions and bad decisions. I know that we had friends when I lived in Los Angeles, we had friends that were constantly wanting to start up some small business, video rental store or a dry cleaner or something like that. And for the foreign people, I don't think they understood how much parking you need. It always seems like they chose a place without enough parking for whatever it was that they were trying to do. You really do need a huge amount of parking. Look at how many, your typical chain restaurant, for example, look at how much parking they have in the parking lots around the restaurants. I mean, it's a really huge amount of space, and close to a typical full-scale, chain restaurant will have close to 4,000 square meters of space for their, the building and the parking lot and all that kind of thing. Sometimes maybe more than that, as a minimum, 4,000 square meters. So it's I wanted to do location modeling. I did talk about, I had a lecture on franchising earlier in the that I used to give, and I talked about the advantages of franchising. I talked about business format franchising and the different models that are used and how it's done and things like that. And I wanted to do that lecture, but we have now more international students, and with the internet and everything, the students have more knowledge, exposure, experience to international issues. And if there's one thing that the Americans still do better than anybody else in the world, it's running and managing business. In terms of our higher education system here is the envy of the entire world. And you go to country after country after country, and the top PhDs, the people who are the intelligentsia of society there, for the most part, they got their PhDs here in the United States. I taught, took a year off and taught at, I did it 2 different times, and taught at an Ivy League school in Korea. And almost everybody there had a PhD from somewhere here in the United States. A few people from Germany, very rarely, maybe one. I don't think so. No, I don't think anybody from the United Kingdom, but a couple from maybe from Germany and other places. A couple of the older professors had Korean university PhDs, but to teach at the Ivy League level in Korea, you have to have a PhD from a American university. So we're, the leaders in managing business, and I think in the future there are going to be more opportunities for our students to go to other countries, maybe working for American firms or maybe even working for foreign firms. It's much easier to find those jobs and everything. So I'm going to include, rather than some of the other things that I would like to do, my final dimension is going to be on the international issues in business. I think there will be many more opportunities. I think even, if you look at our system of retailing, it's probably going to be the one that becomes dominant. Although, I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. It's not clear that immediately and in the near future, in the near term, that it's probably the Japanese system, which is not even used in Japan really anymore, but what I call the Japanese system, seems to be the one that's going to dominate retailing in China, particularly for high-end stuff and name brand stuff, the products that the middle class and the upper middle class and upper class. I guess the upper class can fly to France and Italy and stuff like that to buy Hong Kong to buy stuff, but is going to be dominant there, and that's whatever's going to be dominant in Korea is worth in terms of retailing is worth some mention. So I want to talk about international issues, and for those of y'all that are not students that are watching the video and everything, our students probably don't have a lot of experience to enter international things. I mean, I've asked. I have 5 international students this semester, and that's about probably what I have on a typical thing. But other than that, many of our students have never been overseas, and very few of them speak a foreign language, which is something that, if there's the weakest thing in our culture is our language programs. We at this university we don't even, I don't think we have an Arabic program. Our foreign language. And I don't want to get in trouble with the university administration, but we need some new thinking at the teaching of foreign languages. I mean, it seemed like to me every university ought to at least teach Arabic. I mean, look at that. Look at how many jobs are available to people with the government or with the CIA or with whatever, for people who speak Arabic. Would think things like that. We have a Chinese. Like a simple Chinese, like you can't really, not a full-scale Chinese program. We do have a Chinese program. We got a Japanese program. But very few of the big languages. Now, Hindi, no program for Hindi. No program, a minor program for Chinese. No program for Arabic. All the biggest languages of the world, we pretty much don't have. So we need some new thinking when it comes to that. But so the lecture module 16 in the last lecture module of the course, which will be on test 4, is about international issues. Now, it's very important to understand, first of all, when we talk about going and dealing with people from other countries, where the main thing is the language. The biggest cultural factor is the language. And I really highly recommend, if you're sent overseas and you're going to be 3 years in an Arab country, or a country that speaks an Arabic dialect, or you're going to be 3 years in China, or you're going to be 3 years in Japan or Korea, Germany, wherever it is that you learn the language. You can learn the language, become kind of functionally fluent, even at an older age, and I think it's good for your mind to be able to do that. And I know that some people can't, and they used to use the term, O'Brien used the term monoglot, meaning for somebody that was unable to converse, would never be able to converse no matter how much they were exposed to another language. And I know people that have lived in Korea for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years that couldn't speak Korean. I don't understand how you can do that. And many people who came to this country from other countries, and many people, Hispanic people, traditionally in the old days when we had immigration, there were parts of town where people spoke the language. There was part of town that was Sicilian or Italian or Polish, in Chicago, Polish, and whatever the language was, whatever the country was, Russian, whatever it was, where people could not or did not or never were able to learn English, and I understand that, but we've gotten much better at teaching languages and gotten much better at learning how to educate people to learn another language. I highly recommend any of y'all that are my students, you go to another country, you're going to live there, learn the language, practice the language, get at least as much fluency, ability to communicate in the language as you possibly can. The knowing the language opens up the culture for you and opens things up so that you can participate and understand why things are said the way that they're said. And I'll give you one example. In Korean, they have a verb ending that means somebody said. So if you're using the verb present tense for go, and you say gada go, now, but using this somebody said automatically makes it past tense. So they don't use the past tense, gata go, but just gada go. And that means that somebody said that. And whenever people are talking about history, they always say the verb ending is always da go. It means somebody said, because the speaker does not have any personal knowledge of what happened, say, in the 1800s. All he knows is what somebody from that era said. And because that's automatically indeterminative, meaning somebody said that about that. And they may attribute the person who said it, but in many cases, it's just the discussion of history is somebody said this and somebody said that. And so the Koreans don't trust the history that they've been told. They automatically don't put a lot of faith in it. Whereas when we were kids, we were given a determinative method. You know, the history book said that Betsy Ross sewed the first flag. We were told that George Washington never told a lie. We weren't told somebody said George Washington never told a lie. We were told he never told a lie. Many of the things in history that we were told turned out to be completely false. We were constantly told that we never lost a war. And that's not really true. We certainly, I guess at some point you can say that we never actually won the war to suppress the Philippine independence movement. We definitely did not win that war. We did not win. It's very hard to say that we won all four, at least two of the four Seminole Wars. The most expensive undertakings of the national government in its history up until the Civil War, or the Mexican War, up until the Mexican War, I guess. Certainly hard to say we won at least two of the four Seminole Wars. Hard to say that we won those. So we were told these things, and then when it came time to say, maybe we need to get out of Vietnam, and if Saigon becomes Ho Chi Minh City, which is, I guess, the standard for who won the war. People still today will not accept that we lost the war, but certainly it's hard to say the Viet Minh didn't win the war. I mean, Saigon is Ho Chi Minh City, and the Viet Minh, in their progression, did end up uniting their country, and Vietnam is not South Vietnam and North Vietnam today. It's just one country. So it's hard not to say that they didn't win, even if it is probably maybe not accurate. People can make an argument that we didn't lose the Vietnam War, but it's certainly hard to say the Vietnamese didn't win it, because they certainly did. The Viet Minh did not win it, because they certainly did. So when you're dealing with this type of indeterminate version of history, you look at things differently. And that's just one example of how the language defines you in a certain way. Another example will be, I remember going to Portugal, and some languages have for their nouns a masculine, a feminine, and a neuter or neutral. And because Portuguese comes, I think Catalan is probably the most directly, besides the Catalan language, which it's not called the Catalan language, it's called something else, and I can't remember what it is, but is probably the closest to Latin of any of the Romance languages, closer than anything except Catalan and maybe the language that they speak in Romania. And because they use masculine and feminine. There are words that are masculine and words that are feminine. And it was weird to go in a store. I went into a big grocery store, their big retail entity, a Jumbo it was called. And it was weird because they had, in the bakery section, everybody there was a man. Everybody in the bakery section was male. All the cashiers were female. And all the meat cutters were male. Now, so far, that's okay. It's not the way we like to do things, but that's maybe not that much different than you would see in the United States. All the meat cutters were men. Go back to the seafood section, and the head, women that work there, and the one of the main things they like to eat is this cod, and they like this dried cod, and they make bacalao, and other dishes with this dried cod, and it has to be sawed. And they literally had a saw that they used to saw this fish. And you could see the muscles of the person doing the sawing like that. But everybody in the fish department was female. Everybody that was doing all this hard physical labor in that section was female. And I guess it was because the word for fishmonger is female or feminine. And traditionally, in the history of Portugal, I guess the men, it's a fishing country, the men did the fishing, and they'd stay up all night doing the fishing, and they'd bring the fish home. And the women kind of ran the business. They were the ones that took the fish to the market and sold it. And so they actually ran the retail part of that trade. And then somehow that word came down, I guess, to be feminine. And I probably get an email from somebody saying, "No, that's not right. You're wrong, Don." But I remember telling this example to a PhD student that was there, and she said, "Yeah." She says, "Really?" She says, "We have a lot of problems like that. I mean, how can we get to gender equity in our country? Are we going to have to change the language to get to the point that women can be meat cutters and women can be bakers and women can do these other jobs? Are we going to have to change the language?" And other aspects of the language. She says there's just so much of the machismo element, or the way men think, and the way they treat women is because there's the way the words are embedded in the language. That's another example of how strongly the culture is impacted by language. Now, once we get past language, there are other factors which affect the way people look at things. And we call this culture. Sonia Sackman did a study, I think it was a PhD, but she wrote a book about the culture of IBM. And IBM, one of the big first world information, progressive, forward-moving companies, known all around the world, IBM. And she did a study of their culture, and when she says, as you're doing your dissertation, you have to look up all what everybody says culture means. And she found 242 different, not slightly different, but different definitions of the word culture. So it's not an easy word to say, okay, here's what it means. But I have a few things, and it's not really a definition, but it's kind of what people agree culture is all about. If it's not the definition, it's what it's about. Or first of all, culture is learned. It's not innate. There's certain maybe innate behaviors. For men, we have certain behaviors that we may be naturally tending to do, like not being as clean in the bathroom as our female counterparts. That's part of our natural thing, and probably anywhere you go in the world, the women's bathroom is going to be cleaner than the men's bathroom. That's innate. But the culture is learned. It's behavior that's learned. It's learned through the language, through the way parents treat kids, the way it's passed down through the generation, through the stories that are told in school. Like stories like the United States has fought many wars and never lost. And then it becomes hard. And you heard constantly when the discussion of the Vietnam War, they just didn't want to be the first one to lose a war. I had to find a way, even if it meant extending the war for 3 or 4 more years and thousands of guys dying, had to find a way to not be the first one to lose a war. I mean, that's what, we spent the last 5 or 6 years of the war doing, was trying to find a way to, and finally we negotiated a deal where they would wait 12, 16 months before the Viet Minh, with the deal with the Viet Minh, we would leave, we would get out of the way, and then we have to wait a certain amount of time, and then, before you attack. And they waited about year and a half, and in April of 75, we left in 73, and April 75, they came down, and Vietnam lasted 2 weeks. I mean, 3 weeks, that's all. In 3 weeks, the Viet Minh were in Saigon and renaming it Ho Chi Minh City. And what we had spent, 20, 30 years defending the 30,000-day war was gone. So anyway, it's learned and not innate. The various aspects of the culture are interrelated. In other words, they're very interrelated. Culture you can think of as shared norms among a group of people. And oftentimes the culture defines the boundaries of different groups. We have subcultures within this country. I mean, you've got the skateboard subculture. And one of the part of the culture is to look as if you don't care what you look like. And of course, that's manifested in weird things like pants that won't stay up. Pants that are down around people's knees, and walking around with your underwear hanging out might be part of the skateboarder culture. The goth culture. Wearing the white makeup and the dark hair, and then the goth look. Also, people will take and wear different types of jewelry, and I think part of that is to say, okay, I'm part of the counterculture. I'm not one of the sorority girls. I'm wearing a nose ring and other stuff. I'm not going to try to be a sorority girl, and I'm not going to date any frat boys. That kind of thing. That statement about who you are and what you accept as the values and the other people in the value. Now, for business purposes, I'm going to go through several dimensions of culture for this lecture. And I'm going to try to explain what it means to you when you become a manager. Many of you, and I've talked about this before, we talk about communications issues, become a new manager, and different things like that. Many of you will be managing. You may go to a big city, you may become an executive, you may become manager, district manager. Many of the lower level jobs in retailing in the future now, and may perhaps even more so in the future, will not be held by people who speak English as a first language, not be held by native-born Americans. So many of those jobs will not be held. You will have to learn how to deal with different cultures. And I think if you have a handle on these different cultural differences, it'll help you understand, and you will have fewer problems as a manager in that situation in the future. And I very, very sure that it's coming. It's already here, and you've heard some examples of it earlier. Okay, now there's a number of the ones. If you want to look this up, and those of you that are from outside the university, that are managers, business people that are watching the video on iTunes, there's a number of these I'm not going to do. I'm going through Hofstede's dimensions of cultural difference, and it's Dutch, the kind of the Dutch thing, and we're going to use a little bit different terminology, and I'll try to clue you into that. You can go and look at the Hofstede, Hofstede, and I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I believe that people that are Dutch have told me, Hofstede, have told me that that's how it's pronounced. But if you type that in and Google it, IBM actually did a study of every country in the world, and they compared the different countries' cultural dimensions. And I remember talking about this in Korea. Korea's closest compadre in cultural dimensions was Costa Rica. But now that data is old. And for a country that's changed a lot, like a Mexico or a Korea, Russia, China, India, any country that's changed enormously like all those countries have, Indonesia, Brazil, Argentina, Brazil, Argentina, to use the correct pronunciations, or closest I can get to the correct pronunciations, that have changed a lot. It's probably not going to be very accurate, but it does compare all the countries around the world, and it is interesting. I'm not going to do. There's some others that are either there or not there that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do individualistic versus collectivistic. That's a kind of, society thing. The communism, socialism versus the American individualistic democratic system. We're very high on, and I'm not going to do those. I'm not going to do doing versus being. I'm going to do some others, and I'm going to add a couple in that are not on the Hofstede dimensions in this lecture, and I'm going to try to explain to my students what to worry about if you're with somebody or you have employees or you have a manager or you work for a company or in a country that is different than the United States. So I'll use the United States as a focus and talk about countries that are different from that. Okay, first is power distance acceptance. Power distance acceptance. And that is the extent to which people accept that there are natural differences in the power, the authority that certain people should have. The United States is a very, very low power distance acceptance country. Perhaps the lowest in the world, although maybe the French would give me an argument for that. I have 2 French students now. I'm curious as to what they say about this power distance acceptance. But in countries where there is large power distance acceptance, the people naturally understand and accept that these people are managers. Countries that have a low college graduation rate, where many people drop out of school at an early age and start working, they recognize that these people have college educations. I'm semi-literate. The worker would say to himself, I'm kind of semi-literate. I do my work. Let the bosses make the decisions. In countries with large power distance acceptance, that some of the things that we like to do in this country, the consensus decision making, some of the things with the quality, when we talk about restructuring integration and having service quality project teams to go out and fix things. You have rank and file employees, and where the manager goes out in the television show we have, where Undercover Boss, where the manager goes out and pretends to be the head of the company, CEO goes out and pretends to be a low-level worker. And then they work for work around the ordinary people, and they do things like that, and they show that they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, and they're not afraid to do the lowest level job. That kind of thing is fun and accepted and enjoyed in countries with small power distance low power distance acceptance. In countries with large power distance acceptance, the low-level workers do not want to make managerial decisions. They don't want any consensus decision-making. They don't want to have meetings and have everybody talk about it. If the supervisors can't make decisions, that worries them. They want to feel that their supervisors are smart enough to make the decisions. Supervisors make supervisor decisions, and that, that's not my pay grade. That decision's made way above my pay grade is a typical large power distance acceptance type of mentality. And so they do not want to be involved. They want to trust, and any type of this consensus or forming committees or having this decision groups or any of the touchy-feely types of things that we like to do in small power distance countries, that's not going to go over very well there. That's just going to make them afraid that the bosses don't know what they're doing. They want to feel that the bosses are strong, tough, know what they're doing, and they're going to get everything done, and they're going to be smart enough to keep the company going. So you have to be careful about how much you use this. Come to me and talk to me, because the low-level workers are not going to come to you and air their suggestions for improving the business. They're not going to do that. Here in this country, it's very common the CEO says, any of y'all can come talk to me. Companies have rewards and special contests to see who can come up with the best idea for improving the way things work. In these high power distance acceptance, strong power distance acceptance countries, that's not going to happen. I mean, they don't want to do it. It's not their job. They wouldn't think about coming to the big boss and telling them, maybe we should do something differently. Maybe we should try. Maybe we should try to do this better, or do this, do that better. Maybe if we did this. They might complain to their boss, hope their boss complains to the next boss, their boss complains to the next boss. It's just like privates, military. The one example we have of high power distance acceptance in our country is the military. And even when we write stories or people write books or things like that, it's amazing how many times they take the focus of a private or a sergeant. And that sergeant's always kind of making suggestions to the colonels and the generals on what to do, and the generals and colonels say, okay. It's not really the way the military works. The military does not work that way. comes down. It goes up through the channel and it comes down through the channel. Okay, now the next one has to do with approach to time. Monochronic versus polychronic approach to time. Countries that have a monochronic approach to time, time's important. Being on time's important. Meeting's supposed to start at 9 o'clock. Everybody's there at 9 o'clock. People aren't hanging out, drinking coffee, going to get coffee at 5 minutes after 9. The time starts. Traditionally, we think of like the Swiss and the Germans as being monochronic cultures. The Mediterranean countries in Europe, countries that, the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, those countries are thought of as being polychronic. And of course, most of the culture and the language of Mexico and South America come from either Portugal or Spain. Population-wise, it's probably, I don't know, half and half, pretty close to half and half. I don't know, Brazil's got like 300 million people. So anyway, but those countries that polychronic, being late is not that big a deal. Being late to a party, being late to meet your friends, and I think the cell phone, and unfortunately I don't have my cell phone today, so I'll hold this up, pretend it's a cell phone, but the cell phone frees us to be more polychronic a little bit. You call your friends, and hey, I'm going to be 10 minutes late, send them a text, I'm going to be 5, 10, I'm going to be 20 minutes, 15 minutes late. Other people, yeah, I'm running late too, and you get up with each other and everything, whereas in the past, if everybody was supposed to meet at a place at 7 o'clock and then somebody didn't show up, what are we going to do? So the cell phone and some of the PDAs and the other things that we use allow us to be a little bit more polychronic. And I think our culture, definitely because of the cell phone, because of the way, DVRing and things like that, we become maybe a little bit more polychronic ourselves. And even maybe Germany and Switzerland and countries like that become a little bit more polychronic. But if you're a manager in a place, you've got people from different countries, just be aware that some of the people from the monochronic countries are going to want to be on time. And they're going to bust their rear end to be on time, and they don't understand why other people can come in 10 minutes late or 5 minutes later. Why everybody else, the meeting's supposed to start at 9. They got another meeting at 9:45. People that are there, and even within, forgetting about countries, even within people, there are differences kind of in the approach to time. There are people in Myers-Briggs, they have the judging perceiving scale, and judgers, if you've taken the Myers-Briggs, they like to follow schedules, they like time management, they like to control their environment, whereas perceivers like to be adaptable and flexible and wait to the last minute, procrastinate, and kind of let things happen rather than try to control them, and they are willing to be adaptable rather than feeling like they have to have judgment and order in their lives. They're just willing to let things happen. So even within people, there's differences. And just understand that some people are going to be irritated if the meeting's at 10, other people. So you have to go to the people who are from the monochronic cultures or are extreme, they're retentive. You know what I mean by retentive, I think, and are strong judgers in terms of their personality and say, look, it's around 10. The meeting's around 10. Then you go to the people that are perceivers and say, look, we got a big boss coming in. The meeting's going to start right at 10. So try to be on time. You need to try to be on time. And so the people that are from the polychronic culture, you got to tell them you got to be on time. The people that are from the mono, you say it's going to be around 10, 10-ish, because otherwise they're going to be irritated. And so you have to kind of play both sides against the middle in that type of situation. And so in the next cultural dimension I'm going to talk about has to do with the directness or indirectness of the language. And this comes from work done by two, probably other people that I should cite, but I cite the husband and wife team named Hall. And it has to do with what they call low and high context. Low context means that there's less extra stuff. There's less extra stuff in the meaning. There's less of that. And high context means that the amount of the meaning that is transmitted there's less of it in the words and there's more of it in the context. and are left to be interpreted. And so, English is considered a low context or a very direct language, meaning that we want to say things in English directly, and we value people who say what they mean and mean what they say, and who do not beat around the bush, meaning leaving a lot of things to be interpreted. We don't want to have to interpret what somebody says. We want them to say what they want, and what they mean directly. And so that's the English language. And there are many more words in English than there are in other languages. According to something I saw as a Trivial Pursuit question, more than twice as many as the next language, French. I'm not really sure that's true. I don't know if they really looked at all the languages, particularly glutative languages that put things together, words together to have, longer and longer words. And I would seem like the permutations of that there would be many more words in a system like that than there would be in a direct word order language like English. I'm not really sure that's true, but I do know, I had a friend from China that had a master's degree, and he and I worked in a gambling club, California Commerce Club, as poker dealers on the same shift. And he was an older guy, and he was he didn't. He liked me. He felt like that the job was beneath him. He had a master's degree, and I was probably the only other person out of the 65 dealers on our shift. Maybe one or two others might have gone to college and had college degrees, and he felt like the work was below him, and he liked to talk to me about things like this. And he talked about how English, in terms of being able to say what you mean, was a really great language. It was very, very descriptive. It's a language in which we use a lot of adjectives. You can, one famous writer I remember when I was in ninth grade, studying ninth grade English lit, 6 adjectives per noun. Whereas for instance, in the Korean language, you can only use one adjective per noun. They don't have our system of, you can say he's a strong, tall, handsome woman. You can't say that in their language. You have to use a bunch of verbs, and you can't use multiple adjectives for one noun. So we're very descriptive. Also, another example, in the Korean language, you cannot use you. And I've heard, and I believe that the German students have told me this was true in the German language. In most contexts, you cannot use the word you. You cannot say, are you going to go to town? How have you been? What are you going to do this weekend? All of these questions, you can't do that. You cannot, you cannot use that second person. They do have a second person, na, for you, and ni for your, but you can't use it in most contexts. Only if somebody is beneath you in status can you use the word na or you. And so that or maybe in friendly conversation with a friend, but you can't use it in most business situations. In many situations, you cannot use you. And even in English, we have the singular. We have a problem with the word you being both singular and plural, so that causes confusion in things. And that's why we in the South use y'all. Y'all, according to my Latin teacher, who was the primarily responsible for my knowledge of grammar. Of English grammar, is perfectly good English. It actually is very helpful because y'all is the plural form of you, and it makes it easy. Somebody sees me after church. One of my buddies sees me after church and says, "Hey, why don't y'all come over after you change clothes?" That means, why don't I bring my wife, the kids, the whole family? Northern people always say, "Yeah, you can say y'all to one person," and I say, "No, you can't. That's an improper usage." You wouldn't want to go to the South. When I lived in California or Vegas, I would explain to people, if you went to the South and you said y'all to one person, you would sound extremely ignorant. We say y'all, if I say y'all to somebody and the rest of their family's not there, it means I'm asking, how are y'all doing? Means how are you and your family doing? How are you doing means how are you doing? If I know your family, and we, interacted at church or things like that, it'd be customary for me to say, "How are y'all doing?" as opposed to "How are you doing?" which means I'm asking after somebody's family. So it's a very convenient and excellent usage of English, and everybody in the country should learn how to use it correctly. That may be too much of a challenge for our northern neighbors, however. In other cultures, like for instance, my Chinese friend, he talked about the fact that in Chinese and the halls use Chinese as kind of their example of high context or indirect communication, where it's considered rude to explain something in too much detail. To say exactly what you mean is not what you're supposed to say. There's a lot of use of parables or similes, metaphors, and in many cases it's proper to leave the interpretation up to the other person, and if they're intelligent enough, they should understand the meaning of what you're saying. To go ahead and explain in detail the purpose of what you were saying is a little bit of an insult to the other person. The way in which something is said may communicate a lot. Hand signals and gestures and other things in a language like Italian have a lot to do with the way things are. People communicate. They use the hand signals and everything as they're talking. And so that is an important part of added communication beyond the meanings of the word. Whereas in English, we're primarily focusing on the meaning of the words. That's where most of the meaning is transmitted. And then also the ability of the language to communicate complex meanings is very, very high. So that is, and now in terms of business, if you have workers from a high context communication culture, it may be a little bit embarrassing for them. They don't really necessarily want everything explained in the minute detail. It is very, very common, for example, in American business negotiations to get lawyers involved and to put every little thing that might happen into the contract, and we want to write contracts that foresee as many possible outcomes as possible. Whereas in the Asian culture, an agreement between two companies to cooperate is kind of what they're looking for, and they're not used to and don't want in many cases a complex contract written. For one thing, the civil law system, although it's made tremendous advances in countries Japan, Korea, China, the civil law system is much different there, and it is much less common for lawsuits and people suing. And and companies suing each other, and many different companies, companies that are involved in this relationship and this relationship and this relationship are suing each other over this relationship, and they seem to be able to get along through that. Whereas at the point at which lawsuits and stuff like that occur in China, it's when the two principals for each side, about the only time that happens when the two principals for each side are about ready to kill each other or murder their colleague's eldest firstborn or something. They're that level of animosity before they reach lawsuits. So they, in terms of business relationships, trying to foresee everything, trying to write everything into a contract, trying to be explicit about everything that's going to happen in the future is low context or direct communication cultural tendency. Whereas in high context cultural tendencies to put everything into words and to try to have to express everything, it's very common, for example, for the principals to meet first. And it's not good in those cultures to go directly into business. When you meet, there's a certain amount of socialization that occurs and a certain amount of getting to know each other that occurs, even at the company level, our company getting to know your company and our reps getting to know your people, and things like going out to dinner and breaking bread together or sharing food together. In some cases, I know there's share even more than that, and it's a little bit weird to talk about situations where I've heard that story those stories. But there's a lot of interrelationships that occur before you even start to discuss business. And to get directly to the point of something is considered clumsy and rude in those cultures. It's better to not jump right into the business discussions. Now, they may be highly skilled at subtlety. In high context communication cultures, little subtle things mean a lot. For example, there was a situation a couple years back where the G7 or the G8 or whatever the G was, they had a meeting, and they took a picture afterwards for the news, that showed up in the newspapers around the world, and the Japanese Prime Minister was on the very outside. President Bush was in the middle, or this may have been even back in the Clinton era. The American president's in the middle, and then they have and around him are the French and the Germans and Italians, and the Japanese is way off. Prime Minister's way off on the side. And that communicated a lot. There was a big issue about that in Japan, when we have the third biggest economy in the world, why are we way over here? How come we're not accepted with all these other European-looking prime ministers at the G7 or G8 or whatever it was at that time? Now, when they have pictures of the G20, you can bet that the Japanese prime minister is right there in the middle, one of the main group of ministers. So little things like that mean a lot. And you have to be careful what you say, because it can be interpreted in a really strong way. During the Cultural Revolution, the future leader of the country, Deng Xiaoping, said the following. He said, "What difference does it make if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice and keeps your house free of mice?" And of course, that was interpreted as saying shouldn't really matter whether a minister is completely committed to the Mao-style communism or whether he's more pragmatic. As long as he gets his job done, that ought to be okay. In other words, his political views shouldn't be that important. And he was ridiculed for that and persecuted during the Cultural Revolution for saying something like that. So that's low context versus high context. When you work, you may need to be very direct. Some of y'all, those of y'all that come from other countries, I've got Chinese students in the class, Korean students in the class, French students in the class. If you work in a situation where you're managing or working with Americans, you have to learn to be a little more direct. Say a little bit exactly what you mean and not try to say things that you hope that they'll interpret. Be direct and be things. If you come from a culture where, it's good to go in and be direct, hello, how are you? Let's sign right now. I've got the contract with me. Let's go over it, and we'll get all that out of the way, and let's get everything signed first, and we'll do everything else later. Then we'll worry about other stuff later. So that, going in and wanting to get deals done right away and directly, you may not be able to do that. You may have to be patient with your counterparts, business counterparts from high context communication cultures, and break bread and spend time and talk about other things and get to know each other before you can get right down to the point of the deal. And that may be very hard to do, very hard to do for many people from Western cultures that are very direct. Okay, now the next cultural dimension I'm going to talk about is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance is the extent to which people try to avoid situations of risk and where things are not clear. The United States is a low uncertainty avoidance culture, meaning that we are willing to take chances, and we look up to people who take chances. And the heroes of our culture, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerman, I think it's Mark Zuckerman, and people like that who took chances, became entrepreneurs. We celebrate the Donald Trumps, although Donald Trump probably might not be worth that much more money than his dad gave him to start out with, in truth. We celebrate people like Donald Trump and others like him that are entrepreneurs and who made it big in the business world. Herman Cain now looks like he's going to be the of course, I'm still not convinced I think he's going to flame out here myself, but many people are convinced that he's going to be the Republican nominee. He's like leading in the polls at the time that I'm taping this. He might not be able to withstand the scrutiny that comes with being number one. It seems like everybody who's been number one has been knocked off the pedestal, and that may happen to him as well. But the Confucian culture in China and Korea is high uncertainty avoidance. They really strongly try to avoid uncertainty. South American countries, the countries that were settled by Spain and speak the Spanish language in Central and South America, are high uncertainty avoidance cultures. In cultures that are high uncertainty avoidance, companies, the workers, the employees, have a strong aversion to uncertainty. They, bankruptcy and things like that almost never happen, because if a big company does become bankrupt, the government will step in and guarantee loans and bail them out. And no, the Asian financial crisis was caused by a situation where they did that repeatedly and continually to businesses that were losing more and more and more money. In other words, they couldn't make an interest payment, so they lent them more money so they could pay the interest. Well, then, of course, a couple years later, the next big interest payment came in, and they couldn't make that, so they lent them more money. It's like if somebody borrowed money and didn't pay you back, and you lent them more money to pay you back, and then you take some of that money, and then you lend them more money, and at some point, you're going to have to write off everything they owe you. And so the businesses, they like to keep capital. They do not take risks. They're not going to practice the 100% leverage policy that American companies practice, unless they're absolutely have to. In other words, unless they're absolutely forced into leverage by the fact that their business model is failing, and that they're hemorrhaging money because they're actually losing money from operations. The employees will not change jobs. Employers will not restructure and lay a bunch of people off. It's very common in American business to hear one week that a company is going to cut 50,000 jobs. Bank of America, a lot of the big banks have done that recently. I know Bank of America said they're going to cut a lot of jobs. In fact, one of the responses of many of the CEOs of the American business world to the financial crisis has been to lay people off, to have hiring freezes. In other words, even where you do have jobs open. But what happens a lot of times, they restructure, meaning they lay a bunch of people off over here, and then they realize, we got to get some of those people. We actually need some of that work done. Some of the jobs that they did, we didn't realize they were actually doing a good job, and we needed them. So they go out and hire a bunch of people over here, and of course, they run the risk of getting caught in discrimination suits and unlawful firing suits and a whole bunch of other things if they are laying off older workers and hiring younger ones, or laying off females and hiring males, or whatever it is. They run a lot of risk, and they're always getting caught and being sued and stuff like that. Whenever that happens, American workers change careers. One of the professors was talking about, he read this the other day. Now, I don't know where he read it, and I don't have the citation for it, but he said that they change not jobs, but average American change careers 4 times. Careers, not jobs, 4 times. In other countries, they don't do that. I mean, even though there is no guarantee of lifetime employment in Japan, China, Korea, the people change jobs much less. They get a job and they stick with it. The company they're working for, treats them well. And in many cases, if somebody gets married, they give them a raise. They have a baby. Now, they're not giving them a raise. In America, if somebody's doing a good job and deserve to make more money, they're generating more for us than and they're doing a great job for us. Well, then we give them a raise. We don't say, okay, you need more money because you just had a baby. or but then sometimes, of course, that translates as, okay, you're male, you got a wife that stays home and a baby, you need more money. You're female, you live at home with your mom and dad, you're not married yet, you don't need as much money. You hear a lot of, I mean, that happens a lot in those countries, and definitely the pay scale for men and women is not the same. I know in Korea, and it's a challenge. There's also an age limit on hiring. If you get up to be north of 25 in Korea, it's hard to get on with a big company because they think you're gonna get married and quit. It's a little bit easier now than it used to be, but the tradition, when women get married, they quit. And so if a woman gets an MBA and she's 26, 27, 28, the bigger companies don't want to hire her because they assume that, but around the time you get to be 30, which is the kind of the age at which a lot of women get married in Korea, that you're going to get married and leave. So they don't want to invest a lot of money in you. So people generally keep the jobs, and it's weird to watch the movies and the videos. And in movies, the boss and the employee, when they get mad at each other, they've come to blows. They're fighting each other. They both got bloody lips, and the next day they're back at work as if nothing happened. Nobody gets fired. One movie, a woman gets in a fight, hair pulling, knockdown, drag out fight with a customer over whether the customer paid for 50 cents for an egg or not, Obeck for an egg or not. And they get in this big old fight, and the next day, this lady's back at work as if nothing happened. Of course, in the United States, it doesn't matter what happened. Whether how right you were, if you get in a hair-pulling fight with a customer, which you started, is you had as much to do as a customer did, you're gone. You'll never work there again. I mean, you wouldn't happen. But in those countries, the people and the employers, the bosses can sometimes just really chew out their employees. I mean, just really call them everything under the sun and how stupid they are and what an idiot they are, and they take a lot of verbal abuse. But the boss knows they're not going to quit. Here in this country, if you verbally abuse your employees, you don't have any more employees. So the Lou Grant model of managing, the Theory X type of managing, you may not have any employees. So the uncertainty avoidance in areas where there's a lot of uncertainty avoidance, and this particularly for us here in the United States, workers from Asia, workers from the Mexico, Central and South America have high in uncertainty avoidance. They're not gonna like risk. They want to avoid not knowing what's going to happen next. They don't want to be in a situation where they have to do a lot of interpreting, judging, figuring things out for themselves. They want to, for you to give them their job. They want to feel like if they just do their job, then they'll keep their job. The idea of like mass layoffs and companies that are always restructuring, getting rid of this many jobs, just laying people off willy-nilly, that kind of thing is very unsettling to them, and and they expect, they want to be loyal to the company they work for, and they want the company to be loyal to them. And American-style capitalism, honestly, your company you work for in most cases does not deserve any loyalty, and that's in most cases. Now that's not true for me. I actually had chances to go other places, as my students know. And I just couldn't bring myself ever to leave ETSU. And they have been so nice to me and so good to me here at ETSU. I feel a certain sense of loyalty, and at least a college professor has tenure and has the feeling, they're not going to just restructure and all of a sudden say, Don, we're going to restructure, and all the older full professors, we're going to send y'all on down the road, and we're going to go out and hire a bunch of new assistant professors. They can't, they're not going to do that, or at least in theory, I've got some protection against that. So the uncertainty avoidance. So I do feel a sense of loyalty to ETSU myself. But many of the companies that people work for, the Bank of America's, that Citi, that are laying massive numbers of people off, 2, 3, 4 times. Circuit City. It'd be interesting if you want to read about this. Read Google Circuit City slaughter, which actually there were 2 Circuit City slaughters, and we'll show you, why the American worker really shouldn't feel any sense of loyalty to the company they work for, because the companies are not going to be loyal to you. So that uncertainty avoidance is the last cultural dimension. The last cultural dimension. I think also, if those of you that have in your own personal life, or you tend to be the type of person that's high uncertainty avoidance, that you really avoid uncertainty, you should realize that in our culture, taking chances is sometimes necessary. And one of the mottos of our culture is, a man who won't take chances doesn't have any. And so that's the entrepreneur's motto, so to speak. And that if you are very, very government workers and other people that tend to be high uncertainty avoidance, should understand that most of our culture is not like you, and that many of the workers are going to want you to get out there and take a chance. And I'm always talking to some of my colleagues. I've got one colleague in particular, buddy, that is definitely high uncertainty avoidance, and I'm encouraging to take chances. You've been right on so many of your predictions. Why don't you take a chance and make a prediction publicly, like on your radio show or something, and take chances, and see if you're right. And no, he doesn't want to do that, and he's definitely against that. So the last cultural dimension that I'm going to talk about is competing versus caring. Now, if you look this up, the Dutch and Hofstede call this masculine versus feminine, but in our culture, that's politically incorrect. So in English, typically, and particularly in American English, we say competing masculine versus caring, what the Dutch would call feminine. And so there are cultures that have more of a competing characteristic, and there are other cultures that come from either have a socialistic, France has a very strong socialistic, very strong safety net. It's very easy to go on unemployment for a fairly long period of time, and you make almost as much money as you did working. And so they have that caring type of system. In other cultures, in China, for example, the younger people take care of the older people. This thing about Social Security and people should save money and take care of themselves and not be a burden to their family in retirement, they don't even think about that. It is the natural responsibility of children to take care of their parents, to look after them in their old age, not to put them in a nursing home. In many situations, traditionally, the oldest son would inherit the property, would live in the house, and then the oldest son's wife would take care of her husband's mother and father. And of course, that in the old days that worked fairly well, but in the modern era, all the girls want to marry guys that aren't the oldest son. And that makes it a little bit hard for the oldest son's wife when he can't find a wife. And in the countryside in Korea, about 40% of the brides, nearly half of the marriages are the mail order brides, from the Philippines, or Vietnam, some other place in Indochina, Indonesia. And so that almost half of a lot of mail order brides from other countries, and of course, naturally, a lot of divorce too. That doesn't work out very well in most situations, as you can imagine, when two people don't even speak the same language, getting married. So the competing versus caring, the caring cultures, people take care of other people. It's important to take care of the have-nots. To make sure that the people that are at the lower end of the spectrum have at least a safety net, that they're not hungry, that everybody has health insurance. Most of these caring cultures, health insurance is national health insurance, and nobody is in a situation where they're sick or they're injured or they have a medical problem and they can't go to the doctor, they can't go to the hospital and get something done. Competing cultures. In competing cultures, people value achievement, and they value obtaining status and stature in life. And you have situations where people build bigger and bigger and bigger homes so that they can tell the neighbors, well, my house is 3,000 square feet. Oh, that's nice, My house is 4,000 square feet. Well, I have several friends. I've got to be careful because I know one of them likes to watch these videos, but I've got several friends that live in, I won't use square feet because this is, it's supposed to be a business class, and we're supposed to be up to the standards of AACSB, and I'll use square meters, but about 300 square feet. 300 square feet is close to 3,000. 300 square meters close to 3,000 square feet or four, but they live in 350 square feet houses, square meter houses. So 350 square meter house. Boy, I really tripped myself up there, trying to live up to the international standards. 350 square meter, 3,500 or so square feet houses, and just for two people. I mean, their kids are already grown and they're gone. I've got three different friends that have built recently, or in the last 5 years, have built or made homes like that. And all for two people. Why do you need 350 square meters for two people? Do you really need 30, 40,000, 400 square feet, close to an acre? 400 square feet is close to an acre of land to take care of, to landscape and to garden and to mow and all that. Do you really need all that? I mean, does it really help you that much? I guess if you like to be a little bit far apart from your neighbors, maybe it does fulfill some important need. But there tends to be competition in the cars we drive. My mother has talked about this. I know, when she has heard the lectures that I have given on the computer, and she says, women, you don't realize how much women compete over clothes and how they dress in many offices. Many offices, there's a lot of competition among women about, how much makeup is worn, how much emphasis they put on the hairstyles, and particularly on the clothes that are worn. A lot of competition, and they really hate it if one woman steps up and starts buying designer $200-300 dresses. I guess designer dresses might even be $1,000. Somebody starts buying these real expensive designer dresses, then the other people have to compete with that. Feel like the other women feel like they have to compete with that, and they get really angry, and they go to the boss and say, "You're going to have to pay me more money because I need to dress like, if I'm going to have to dress like Lucy does, and I can do that, but you're going to have to pay me more money to do that." And the boss, male boss says, "Well, we don't care what you look like." And of course, that's not the right thing to say to a female. "We don't care what you look like" is not the right thing to say. That's a situation that has to be handled very subtly. So the men compete the size of their boats, speed of their boats, size of their cars, speed of their cars, the size of their houses, or I think men and women both size of the houses. But people also compete, vicariously with their kids. There's a lot of competition among the parents of a soccer team or a little league, or not even little league, a t-ball team over, which kid, whose kid is better and whose kid is more skilled at sports and stuff like that. And there's a lot of that type of competition and in a competing type of culture, and where people value the title that they have. If you ask people in Korea what they do, if they work at an office somewhere, in an office, they'll just say, "I'm a Sawan." Or if it's for a big company, "We Sawan." And many people will just say, "I'm an office worker." Well, I'm an office worker, working in an office. Here, you hear their exact title. "I'm a sanitation engineer." I'm a recycling specialist, meaning I go around and I pick up the recycling totes and I separate them and put, the paper and so no matter whatever the job is, we have a fancy title for it. And there was a good article in Bloomberg the other day about companies are getting in the habit again. They've done this before, but they get in the habit of giving people a promotion without a pay raise, promoting them and giving them a bigger, newer title, but no pay or any compensation that goes with that. So that's becoming evidently that's becoming more popular now, and so people like that status and the competition for promotions, the competition for who has the biggest houses, and much less about the caring for the weaker members of society, much less about caring for parents and caring for the people around us, spending time with the parents. It's a very a strong cultural ethic that when a holiday comes up, that you get your kids and family together and you go back to your hometown and you let your parents spend time with your grandparent, your parents spend time with your kids. In other words, be grandparents with your kids. It's a very strong ethic, and there's certain holidays like Chuseok where if you want to take a bus that takes normally 4 hours, the subways are all full. You want to take a 4-hour bus, it might take you 20 hours to take a 4-hour bus ride, and the buses in Korea don't have bathrooms. So during the Thanksgiving, Chuseok, I think would be translated best as Thanksgiving holiday, everybody has to go back to their hometown. Now, we have some of that here, but in many cases, we're spread out. My mother has a son in Maine, 2 sons in California. I'm in Tennessee. I'm the closest one, except for my little baby brother, who was my mother kept very close at home and didn't really let him wander very much. He always, I think, wanted him to stay really close to the nest, at least have one chick really close to the nest, and he's in Gainesville, Florida, near where my mother lives. So so that's individualism. That's competing versus caring. Okay, that's it for the international issue of retailing as far as culture is concerned. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and this will be kind of the last module of the last thing of the semester, and the second half of the international lecture, is the system of retail. I'm going to talk a little bit about the system of retail in other countries and how it differs from the United States. Everybody is interested, and it's a little bit of a stretch to call a marketing PhD a scientist, but we think of ourselves as at least pseudoscientists anyway, and we do research, and we have to publish articles, and the last couple of articles that I published have been about retail evolution theory, and in particular, what everybody's interested in right now, because retailing is pretty saturated in the United States. It's pretty saturated in Europe. Now, you do see, for example, Zara's. Out of nowhere, you see a new clothing. When you think that the whole genre is just chock full, you got everything from Hot Topics way over here on the goth, tattooed, pierced, new age kind of level, and then you got all the way over here, and you've got, say, a Talbot's, which caters to career women over on the other side, and then kind of everything in between, and then you have somebody like Zara's come in and be successful. But retailing in Europe and the United States is very saturated. It's going to be hard for anybody to come in and take, and any new type of retailing format or any type of retailing entity to come in and be hugely successful. Restaurants maybe is a little more open. So everybody's interested in what's going to happen in the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, China, and India. India and China. The BRIC countries, B-R-I-C countries. Everybody's interested in what happens in those countries. Those countries together represent almost 40% of the world's population. And it's like the business version of the Wild West. Somebody's going to come in and be hugely successful there. Now, there's some Western entities, Pizza Hut, with Yum Brands, which I think owns Pizza Hut, Kentucky Fried Chicken, which are both huge successes in China. Kentucky Fried Chicken just bought a Mongolian, or not Mongolia, but the Mongolian province of China based chain of restaurants that I guess you would translate it as, I think it's translated as spicy bean paste soup restaurant or something like that, and the company's translated as fat sheep restaurants. as the name of the corporation that owns the restaurants. And so they bought and gone out and are trying to buy a bunch of Mongolian restaurants in China. I think you have 300 or 400 of these restaurants in China. So they're trying to expand, and they've been very successful. In terms of traditional retail, like say clothing retailing and other types of similar retailing, handbags, accoutrements, and things like that. The current system that's in vogue in China now comes from Japan through Korea. The Korean culture is really big in China now, and Chinese watch a lot of Korean movies and Korean dramas. The Chinese, I have to be careful because I like to practice my Korean language, but I have to be careful as many of the Chinese students now, particularly the female Chinese students, they dress like Koreans, and so sometimes I'll get mixed up, and I can insult one of the Chinese by insinuating that maybe she's Korean. By speaking Korean to them, and then I have to back up and I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got you mixed up with somebody else. I did never, even for a second, did I think you were not Chinese, or maybe something, a racial group other than Chinese." But it's because they wear their hair and dress like the Korean girls, and they call it the Hallyu, which is the invasion of the Korean culture into China, and the retailing system comes from there. Comes from Korea into China, and many of the biggest retail operations now are run by the large-scale Korean retailers, and what we would think of as a mall, they don't have the traditional suburban malls, but they have CBD shopping districts, central business district shopping centers that they call Baekwajum. Use the term Baekwajum, and this Baekwajum model is what's come to dominate in China, particularly for upscale, like name brand type of stuff. Not the low-level stuff that is knockoffs and fakes that are sold in the outdoor markets and things like that. I think that still is most of what is done in terms of retailing. But in terms of for the American companies, when they go to China, they're not going to be competing at the bottom end. They're trying to compete for middle-class customers. So the competition for the middle-class, upper middle-class customer, the system of retailing is a system that was developed in Korea. And what they have is you'll have typically a multi-level building in a central business district. And the multi-level building, typically the basement or sub-basement, will have food. So the basement level is food. And then the first level are the high-end brands, your LMVH brands, your Gucci, Coach, Louis Vuitton. I'm sure I'm not saying Louis Vuitton, those types of brands that are sold at the first level, it's clothes, and then up towards the top, up towards the fourth or fifth level, you'll have like one level that's men's stuff. So, not counting the grocery, you have about 4 or 5 times as much, as many articles that are for females as you do for males, because typically the female, and it's true in Western countries too, spends much more money on personal items than males do. I'm not sure if in our culture is a boat and a fishing reel a personal item. No, the boat is for the whole family to enjoy. It's not for me. I'm just joking. Just kidding. So they have 4 or 5 floors. Now the interesting thing is that each little section is a particular brand, and the people working in those sections do not work for the big, large-scale retailer. They work for whatever brand they represent. So if there's a section that has Louis Vuitton, the people that work in there work for Louis Vuitton or Louis Vuitton's distributor or the company that they outsource the managing of that center to. But they do not work for the retail store. They do not work for the retail store, the people that built the Baekwajum. They do not work for those people. They work for the store. And you may have hundreds of these. In each floor, you may have dozens. And they may not be. Most of y'all have been into my office because you had to take an oral exam on the quantitative, the oral part of the quantitative exam there, and you've seen how, but not much bigger than my office. A couple hundred square feet. In some cases, only 9 square meters. In some cases, maybe 20 square meters would be a fairly big operation, and 30 square meters would be, designed only a big name brand. Now, when something is sold, if for example, I'm the manager of the Louis Vuitton section, and somebody comes in and we sell them $1,000 worth of stuff, we do not take the money. In fact, we have no facility for taking the money. They take the item, we take the sales check out, and the people either go out themselves, or we take the credit card and everything out, and there's a minder, and they call it a floor manager, and then there's a cash register and stuff. The Becwa Jump takes the money, and so the individual stores do not make any deals, and in fact they have a minder or manager that main job is to make sure that nobody's making deals under the table. Nobody's selling something, taking in any money under the table. And if Louis Vuitton, I'm the manager there, we sell this thing for $1,000, well then that goes out, they go out and they pay the Becwa Jump. And all the money and the transactions handled by them, and then they have a commission on that. We would call it a commission, and I forgot what the Chinese students have translated it into English as, but it's essentially just a commission. I think the best way to translate it into English is as a commission, and it's a certain number of points. And if you're a low-level brand, and you're a national brand, you're not an big international brand, you do not have a big international name, but you have some nice products. Maybe you're a local designer, and you managed to get some space, you're making some sales, maybe as much as 40%. I think typical is somewhere in the high 20s or to 30%. Somewhere in around 30% is typical for most of the brands. The big name brands that everybody knows and are a big part of the thing, they may pay a very low percentage. And to get them into a mall or a Becwa Jump, it's not really a mall, it's like usually one building. To get them into a particular Becwa Jump, there may be a lot of incentives. It's just like if you want to get Bass Pro Shops into a mall. I know a mall in Tallahassee wanted to get Bass Pro Shops in, and they demanded millions of dollars up front to help them do it. Because they said, look, we're going to bring so much traffic to this place that we deserve to be incentivized for that. We deserve to be compensated for that. I mean, what other type of business, if you have a Bass Pro Shops in a mall area, men will go there and take their wives and drop them off and say, honey, shop as long as you want, have a good time. What other business can say that? What other business can get a guy to want to take his wife to the mall? Only a Bass Pro Shops can do that in the United States. Nobody else can. So the bigger stores, the more powerful ones, they get a special deal. They pay a much lower commission. They may get some money to do remodeling. They're all sorts of, they get the premium space on the first floor, the second floor, the premium space, all of these kinds of things. A lower level brand may pay 40%. Now then also, you have monthly, there's a daily quota really, where they want to see some action every day. So if you have a store and then a whole day goes by and nobody buys anything, they may get on you about it. I mean, you have meetings in the morning, and each floor manager kind of sets a goal for everybody, and then you have a monthly goal. If you don't meet your monthly goal, they may kick you out, because there's not a lot of stuff. There's a little bit of space, as little as 3 meters by 3 meters of space, 100 square feet of space. And if you're not doing it, out you go. And there's definitely at least once a year, they kind of close and they redo the whole store. And whichever brands have not been performing well, out they go. And I know my co-author on a work I did in China told me that the company that she had used to work for, she now works for LMVH, but the company as a fashion buyer, The company that she used to work for, they had been in a particular Baekwajeom in Gangnam, which is one of the high culture, rich areas of Seoul, and she had been in that. Her store, the old people that she'd worked for, the buyer that company she'd been working for, had been there for many years. But they'd been falling off a little bit, and when the newest floor plan came out for the next year, they weren't on it. And you're not on the floor plan, that means you're gone. Every person that's in there, they do not pay much in rent. And they do not have so in other words, they do not have a long-term lease. They do not have they can be kicked out for any reason, and that's particularly true for the smaller brands. That's not true for the bigger brands. They're not going to be kicked out. They're not going to kick out Chanel, or they're not going to kick out Louis Vuitton. They're just a Coach or any of those big name brands. They're not they're not being kicked out. But the smaller companies, the smaller entities, if they're not making sales, out they go. And as a shopper, if you go in a section, you have that one place. Now, the reason that this system is needed primarily, more than anything else, is that there is a trust issue in many countries around the world. And this is true in large areas of Europe. It's very true most other places in the world. And the reason is that they don't have the respect for intellectual rights that is traditionally true here. People here, even individuals, they will not use software unless they buy it. I mean, they will not illegally download software. We will not illegally download movies. I mean, there are some people out there that do some of this peer-to-peer type of stuff. We won't do that kind of thing. But in other countries, that respect for intellectual rights and respect for somebody's intellectual property does not exist. And if you go out to a little shop or some unregulated entity like a market, in the Confucian culture, they had certain days that were designated market days, and you'll have these big outdoor markets, and you'll have all these vendors, and they've got stuff there that's very, very cheap, but of uncertain quality. And you can almost be 100% certain that anything that you buy that has a name brand on it, a Polo or whatever it is fake. It's almost a certainty that it's a fake. In fact, the only place that you can get stuff that's legit, that's not fake, that really is the name brand, is at the Baekwajeom. I mean, that's, or some freestanding store that has that company's name. And even then, you have to be careful. So you have to be careful about buying anything in many of these countries, and that's true from Italy and Europe and Asia and almost any place you go outside the United States and a few other countries. You're in danger of getting something that's fake. If you just buy it from a little shop beside the road or somebody that does not have, that's not like in the movie Oh Brother, was it verified or certified or whatever, verified. There's not verified. And the only place you can have something to be verified legit, verified not fake, is at the Baekwajeom. And that's that's not the main reason, but that's one of the principal reasons why they have this system where each retailer pays 30% or even more of their profit off the top to the owner of the Baekwajeom, and is in such a situation of asymmetrical power, where the big company, the retailer, the people that built the big mall or the big central business district shopping thing that I call a Baekwajeom, they haven't, they built it, they have all the power, and the little store owners or the little brands that are in each 3 by 3 meter cubicle, other than some of the big name international brands, they have so little power compared with the big people. And that system, if you think about it, has a lot of extra cost. I mean, there is rent, but most of what they pay is the commission. It comes off the top. No way to avoid it. They've got minders there. You cannot get around the commission. You must perform. up to a high standard. And there are even examples that I wrote about where business owners told me, we were short of our quota and we had to fake sales. We had to fake $10,000 worth of sales, which means we're basically just giving $3,000 to the Becwa Jump. But at least we made our quota, and then they're happy for another month. And so, we had to do that. I mean, business was down, business was out. We'll take it back out. We ran a fake charge, and then we'll charge it back when we have a big month. We'll charge that back. And we're over our quota, but until we charge it back, we've just given $3,000 to the Becwa Jump. So we ran up a $10,000 fake sale. They kept their 30%. We got $7,000 back. The number of workers that you have to have when if you can imagine American store, many times there might be a whole section that's unpeopled, unmanned, and it's not necessary. Whereas in the Korean system, there have to be several people in every single store, and that's another thing the Becwa Jump is going to enforce. I mean, if they see a section empty, they're going to, where is everybody? The manager, the floor manager that works for the Becwa Jump wanders around. If they see something that looks sloppy, they see this sloppy looking bottle of water sitting around, they get on them about it. If the display cases aren't exciting enough, the Becwa Jump gets on the people that run that little 3 meter by 3 meter spot and tell them, you need to fix this up, you need to improve it. Somebody goes into a section and they don't get greeted in like 2 seconds. If you go to the Becwa Jump in that system, one of the things that happen is if they have they'll have these little pieces of tape, and you can actually see where they have squared off the space. And once you step your foot over that piece of tape, they're on you. And some of the buyers, a really good customer might spend thousands and thousands of dollars. I know in the example of research I wrote that many of the managers said, I've got customers that spend $100,000 a year, iluk in Korean language, with me, and they treat me like I'm their daughter or something. They come in, we have a glass of wine, we sit down, we do things. If I get something new in that they might like. The main reason, of course, that people want to shop at high-end retailing stores and wear high-end stuff is the prestige of that type of thing. And another thing you notice is the bags. Like if the Louis Vuitton bag, the bag itself is very nice. And people will carry the bag around even if it's empty. Sometimes you'll see people carrying around one of these bags from the Becwa Jump, and you kind of, on the subway or the bus, you kind of glance inside, and they've been to the grocery market, but they put everything they put all their stuff into a Louis Vuitton bag, shopping bag, so that they can carry that around and make everybody think that they ride the bus or ride the subway, but they shop in the Becwa Jump for all their clothes. So there's the status. I think the status symbol is the main thing when you're talking about the high, you're going after the middle class in China, the middle class in Korea. The one thing, many of the middle class and upper middle class there, they have not been traditionally middle class and upper middle class. Many people that are in the middle class here that say are my age, our parents were also in the middle class. My parents are in the middle class, I'm in the middle class, my kids are in the middle class, everybody kind of is in the middle class. Whereas in those countries, many of their parents were not in the middle class. Even if they had high level, under the old communist system in China, even people that had a fairly high level profession, like maybe a doctor or something, wouldn't have made that much money and would have lived a very ordinary life, would have lived what is essentially, in our way we would look at it, is a blue-collar level status income, blue-collar status level house or apartment, and everything. And so they would not have been, so they're newly rich, newly wealthy, newly affluent. The first generation to be really affluent in many cases in their culture, because both of these countries have come a long way in in the last few years. The same thing is true in India. Same thing is true in India, although I don't know as much about the Indian system of retailing. So it's going to be interesting. Now, the American system's a little bit different. Obviously, y'all know that. The stores pay rent, and they come in. The malls are in suburban areas where people drive. The malls have huge, humongous parking lots so that they still have a place for people to park during Christmas. People come in to draw stores or anchor stores, and then they, which, like for instance, our mall here has 3 anchor stores. I believe at the time that I'm taping this, it's Belk's, Penny's, and Sears. The Westtown Mall, the biggest mall I think in our is the Westtown Mall in Knoxville, and I think it has 5 anchor stores. And it's been a few years since I've been there, but there used to be like a Parisians. I don't want to name them all because I know I'll forget. Has 5 anchor stores, and then you have interior to that an indoor mall area where you have people walking and enjoying themselves, and there are lots of little shops. Used to be record stores, but they're not there anymore. But lots of little clothing shops, little specialty shops for computer games, everything under the sun. Usually a couple places that cut hair, usually 3 or 4 jewelry stores, 2, 3, 4 jewelry stores in every mall in the United States. And everybody pays rent. And they pay a certain amount per square foot, and they pay another cost. It's part of either the triple net or part of the association cost for marketing and advertising if you're in a mall. So when people go to the store, they don't really have to worry about getting counterfeits. I mean, I'm sure there are stores maybe where they might do that, some small independent operation that sells counterfeits, but you get the real thing, so you don't have the issue of being scammed and having to make sure by paying a lot of extra money to make sure you have the legitimate, the real thing. You can go into almost any store in any mall anywhere in the United States, and you can be pretty sure that whatever you're getting is the actual brand and not a knockoff and not a fake, and it's not going to fall apart. For one thing, the return system here, the ability of people to return things. In the Becwa Jums, you can return things that you buy that don't turn out to be right or that are defective. And they will either have to fix it or they'll have to give you your money back. And that's a new kind of thing because the caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, is the traditional policy of retailing in many of these cultures. The ability to talk with Indian professors about this, the ability of American customers to take stuff back takes a lot of the risk out of the situation and makes it okay. We can go to Walmart, which sells stuff at the lowest price level, sells generally the cheapest stuff, not the high-end stuff. And we can go there and buy things, but we still don't have a lot of risk of performance failure because if there's a quick performance failure, we just take it back. It doesn't work, we just take it back. Bought a trimmer from Lowe's and I got a house brand. Got the cheapest house brand trimmer I could get because I don't need to do that much trimming once in a while. And it just didn't work. I mean, the mechanism that you use for the getting the wire just wouldn't go together. It just didn't work. Took it back. Not a word said. Give you your money back. In other countries, you can't do that. You can't take something back that's been used. A weed whacker that you've used and has got weed stuff all over it, even if it's obvious that it didn't work well. You cannot normally take those things back. If you do, you might be able to exchange it for another one. They might go back and give you that, about the best you could possibly hope for in most other cultures. So there's that difference in the retailing system because people at the low end of the wage spectrum, there still is a much larger underclass of people. Paying workers costs much less in those countries. In China and India, particularly retail workers are going to make much less money relative to even the minimum wage that workers here in the United States make. The minimum wage here is much better. Automobile workers probably make more money, much more money than automobile workers in Japan than they do here in the United States. In Korea, it's very comparable. somebody that works in an automobile manufacturing facility makes probably about as much. They don't get all the benefits, and they don't have all the people that are paid for not working and stuff like that. But the pay rate is pretty similar. It may work a little bit longer hours than they do here, but the pay is going to be pretty similar. But retail workers, people at the low end of the wage scale, and particularly female workers, do not have to be paid much. Also, because you have in a place where you have national health insurance, you don't have the cost of health insurance associated with full-time workers that you do here. So the cost of managing, paying managers and having managers and other full-time type employees is much less than it's going to be here. So even though so the cost is much less, but I think a lot of the retailers in those countries have such a high level of staffing. Such a high level of staffing. I mean, in a particular, if you took the same 100-meter space, 100 square meter space, average 100 square meter space, and said, how many employees do we have per every 100 square meters in a shopping store in the United States versus like a Penny's, a Belk's, a Saks, or whatever, versus the same amount of space in a Bekwajum. And they would probably have 10 times as many employees in the Bekwajum. 10 times as many employees. And they pay them less, but they have so many more that the cost structure is high. The cost of paying 30 or 40% commission off your sales. In other words, your average gross margin, 30% of that's already lost. For every $1,000 you sell, you lose $300 or more, a little bit less, a little bit more. On average, in commission to the Bekwajum, if you're one of the individual shops, if you're one of the little individual shops in the mall, that's a huge cost. And during the quant lecture, we talked about, we looked at different companies' profit margins, and we looked at different companies' inventory turnover rates and things like that, and you realize what a high that if the average American retailer had to give up 30 to 40% of their off the top of their sales, that they would be absolutely broke. I mean, that is their profit. I mean, typically 40% profit margin is a very healthy profit margin for an American clothing retailer. That would be a hugely successful year if you're if you had for every $100 million in sales, you could keep the cost of goods sales at $60 million or under. That would be a hugely successful year for most clothing retailers. So obviously the cost structure is very inefficient in those countries compared with the American system. That extra, that the cost of having the minder, and essentially what you're doing, what people are doing, the customers are doing, is they're paying for the name of that. They're paying for the name, and then they're paying that extra money for the guarantee of authenticity. The guarantee of authenticity. And that's to those societies, that's a cost to them for not respecting intellectual rights and not and permitting knockoffs and fakes and not doing anything. And to the point where the only place people can buy a legitimate item is a place that they've got to pay an extra 30 or 40% commission, because in the long run, everybody that's in retail has to make a profit. If there's a 30 to 40% extra cost structure, 30% or average extra cost structure that's imposed on the top for authenticity, the customer's paying for that. And so that's the way that the systems work. That's an example of the other type of system that our system is competing. It's very interesting to me whether the Western type of retailing that we have here in the United States, the kind of the suburban mall system, whether that's going to become the dominant model, or whether you're going to see, or whether the Japanese system, the Eastern system, has come to dominate. At least right now, for high-end, for the high-end, which I would mean middle class and high middle class type of merchandise that's being sold, name brand stuff, designer brands and name brand stuff, the Japanese system is what's in place. Whether that will continue over the long run, I'm really extremely interested in that, and I'm particularly if I have people from India or China who are watching the show and they want to email me or whatever. You can look up my name at the East Tennessee State University www.etsu.edu website, and just type in my name, Shimwell, and my email will come up, and you can feel free to email me and let me know what you think. I particularly wish that I had more information to give my students about India, Indonesia, Russia, Brazil, things like that. So if anybody's watching and can wants to say or explain what's going on in those countries, I'm really interested. Okay, that is the end of Module 16. That is the end of the course in terms of the lecture. Good luck with Essay Test 4. For the students in the course, you've watched 16 of these podcasts, taken 4 essay tests, also participated in 12 different assignments, written assignments associated with the podcast and everything. And the students, at least the first experimental semester that I've had, have done a really good job on the assignments. I've been really interested to see. I really think it's great how the assignments have gone. So anyway, I've enjoyed teaching the course. This would be normally the time at the in a regular class what I would tell the students, how much I enjoy teaching the course, and I really do actually enjoy being a teacher, and have no desire to go into administration or other things. I hope that I'm still teaching here when I'm 85 years old. I don't want to quit. I don't want to retire. People start talking about retirement. I don't want to retire. I really enjoy being a teacher. Really enjoy teaching this class. I hope that y'all did well. I hope that you learned a lot. And if it's December, have a nice Christmas. If it's May, have a nice summer. If it's August, have a nice rest of the summer.